Welcome to the On Garden Design podcast with Fleur and Sachi, where we talk about what makes a garden great and we try to inspire and make designing accessible to anyone who is interested in gardens, plants and chatting. Your hosts are longtime friends, Fleur and Sachi, that's me, who bring a fresh perspective and their life experience to designing gardens as a second career. You can find us on Facebook and Insta for those social media hounds, and we'd love to have you subscribe so you know when the next episode is available. Hi, Fleur.
Hi, Sachi.
What are we chatting about today?
Well, I think we're going to launch ourselves into part 2 of design solutions for problem areas in your garden, and this one's specifically about structural problems.
This is the how to undo those things that man has put in the way of actually what was originally a beautiful landscape.
And of course, we mean man being people.
No, let's not bring gender into this.
That's right. That's
a whole other conversation.
Rather genderist of you.
That's right.
That's right. Well, before we get going, I think it's quite nice just to acknowledge that I've got a very special event coming up. And that is...
Oh, no!
And that is my dearest friend's big birthday. Actually, it's not a significant number, but it's kind of, we're moving there.
Oh, I was about to say, because it's got a significant number in front of it now, every birthday is significant because you're like, yeah, I survived another year.
And so that's kind of a really fun thing. And one thing that we're very much looking forward to doing is giving the igloo raclette a go tonight. So we're going to sit in a little
plastic
pop-up bubble in the middle of a lawn somewhere out in public.
Eating melted cheese.
And being served lots of beautiful French cheese that we drip all over charcuteries and stuff like that. So it's a really fun thing.
It will be.
Forward to it.
It
Great
will
way
be.
to celebrate.
Look, and if you haven't worked it out, she's talking about my birthday, which I usually try and just slide under the rug so that it's not quite so obvious and I'm not reminded how much older I'm getting each year, unfortunately. But it is a fact of life, I guess.
It is a fact of life.
Bit like structural problems in the garden. How's that for a segue?
That's a great segue because we all have a few structural problems in our bodies at this stage in life.
That's right, exactly. Maybe we should have called it gardening with structural problems in the body.
Oh, that's far too much for one episode.
That's a lot of core exercises, I think, that we'd need to talk about. Anyway, let's actually get into it. So let's just recap because we did environmental problems in the garden last time, and environmental problems that you can deal with design solutions. But this is about structural problems, and we're looking at it in winter specifically because it's a time where not only can you see all the things that really annoy you throughout the year, but it's really obvious, but also because it's probably a bit easier to get in winter and do some fixing of stuff when you don't have all the branches in the way, you don't have the leaves in the way, or you're not too fussed about trampling on things because they're looking pretty average anyway.
Yeah, that's right. And it's a time where you can be a bit more honest with yourself and say, do I ever really use that space? And it's really staring at me like...
After you've sunk all that money into building it. I'm thinking of outdoor kitchens.
Oh, yes. And, fire pits.
Yeah.
If you're not using your fire pit in winter...
I've never been a fire pit
When are you
fan.
using your fire pit?
Yeah, it's like those gas heater things that everyone went out and bought. If I've got a nice warm house, why am I going outside to sit in the cold around a little heatery thing?
Yeah, that might be a good spot, though, if you've got teenagers.
True.
They're outside. You're inside.
Excellent idea.
Yes.
Well, there's a structural solution for a teenage problem.
That's right. That's right. As long as your heat lamp has a Wi-Fi connection on it or Bluetooth.
Yeah, or there's a very strong Wi-Fi connection in the vicinity.
Ah, that's it.
Yes.
That's it.
Anyway, back to our topic.
Yes. So let's have a think about some of the man-made things that we put into our gardens that then actually become problems.
In themselves,
yeah. So how are we going to fix them? So, we think first and foremost, everybody has a problem with fences. Now, when I'm called into a garden, I have to say...
Colorbond fences.
Colorbond. There's generally Colorbond is the biggest problem. Everyone wants one because of their longevity and their instant privacy. But once they put it in, they're like, oh...
Now all we can see is the fence, and we're in
so
jail.
Ugly.
We're in fence jail.
Fence jail, and you can legally have them put in up to 2.2 metres in a residential
that's
situation.
Huge. Like that's way taller than me.
Tall.
And you.
I know. It's like two of us standing on top of each other.
That's right. We could be on each other's shoulders.
Yeah. Yes.
And you still couldn't see over.
And if you get caught doing that, then your neighbours think you're really weird.
That's true. That's true. I was just thinking, because I was listening to the radio today. There's this fantastic concept that some person's come up with. Gee, I love how people do this. They've come up with this thing called energy vampire. That's it. And so those people that suck the energy out of you because they just don't give back or they don't offer anything in exchange.
It's the prying neighbour over the fence.
Well, no, I was thinking the Colorbond is the vampire,
the energy
vampire of the
Yes.
garden, because it sucks all the energy out of the garden and makes it feel really miserable.
Yes, that's a really great analogy. It is.
You like my analogy?
It is. No, I do. And it's got nothing to do with clothes.
No, that's right. Or
body
doctors.
parts. That's right.
Oh, that's right.
But
anyway,
yes.
but yeah, Colorbond. Let's go back to the nitty-gritty.
Let's do that, because we innately we all want a fence. We all want privacy, and a fence is instant privacy. So, most people want one. Most people have one. And
sounds a bit like a toothbrush, but you don't really want it. It's not something you like buying.
But it's kind of necessary.
That's right.
Yes. So what I think, the thing that really strikes me is why there are even different colours available for Colorbond, because to me there should only be one colour, or maybe two, and that is Monument, Dulux Monument, or Dulux Woodland Grey.
So what's Monument? Like, for those who don't know, what is it?
It's a really dark shade of grey.
So basically you're saying a grey or grey?
A grey or grey.
50 Shades of Grey.
Yes.
Without the excitement.
So really Colorbond should come in 50 Shades of Grey. Now, why do I say that?
Yeah.
Yeah, because a light fence is reflective and it makes a space feel smaller. It's very present and it says, look at me, look at me.
Quite apart from the fact, in addition to saying, look at me, is that they really, they can actually have a really bad effect on the plants that are directly in front of them. Hot Australian summer sun, you're basically cooking whatever is in the vicinity of the fence. It can create a really, really hot, dry microclimate.
So then listeners might say, well, doesn't a hot Colorbond fence even get hotter if it's painted dark?
Yes, good question.
Yes. So, metal fence is a metal fence hot.
You just can't get around that.
Can't get around it.
Unless you put a cooling breeze with a fan on it.
Yes.
It's going to be a hot fence.
But now the point of having a dark fence is that it recedes. And and in fact, I'll put up some pictures of this on Instagram on for this episode, because it's so interesting when you see a fence that starts off a light colour and then a client will paint it dark. And it's amazing. The whole energy of that space changes. The fence recedes into the background. The plants pop and the plants become the stars of the show. There's no reflective light, and the space just feels calmer. So I'd say, top tip, and often when we're grappling with a Colorbond fence that can't be sort of concealed or disrupted in other ways, it's paint it dark and it has an immediate impact.
Yeah, okay. So, that's a really fantastic way of dealing with the fence itself. But obviously the first thing that comes into my mind when I'm seeing an ugly Colorbond fence is, how can I not see it? So What do we do there? Like, hedging is the obvious thing, some kind of screening, planting.
Yes. Screening planting is people's sort of go-to option.
Yeah.
But I always say to everyone, look, your yard's a limited space. If you put a hedge in front of your Colorbond fence, not only do you have a maintenance headache for a long time, if you're doing something like pittosporum, then you're trimming that every 2 or 3 weeks in summer. It's growth
if you're
season.
keen, if you need precision edges.
Well, if you want to thicken it up and be a proper hedge, then you've got to trim it a lot, and it's very fast growing. So,
and if I can
careful.
also add to that, pittosporum also doesn't last long, so you will be replacing that at some point. Hedges, they're not a very long-lived plant.
Well, you've got to create good conditions for it. They just don't like wet feet, and they'll fall over quickly if they've got wet feet.
Like anyone.
That's right. That's right. I don't like standing in a puddle all day either.
No, that's right.
But what I was going to say about hedges is that you are robbing yourself of, 1.2 metres or 1.5 metres off your property, all around the boundary of property, if you put a hedge around your fence.
And that's kind of a minimum hedge plant, isn't it, really?
Yes.
That would take that kind of space away.
Yeah.
And if I was better at maths, I'd do the maths. That would be quite a bit of volume off your block if you have a reasonably sized block.
Yeah, yeah. So really, hedge is one solution in a whole bundle of different options, but I'd say use it judiciously, because if you have a smaller space, which most of us do, you want to really make the most of that space. So
what do we do? Exactly.
Okay.
What do we do?
Right, so another way to use foliage, but a lot less of footprint on your land, is to create trellising and to have a vine.
Some kind of climber.
Yeah,
Crimer. Crimer, if you want to invite some robbers into your garden and climb up the trellis.
You could certainly...
You could have a crimer.
Yeah, or they could just come through the gate.
Or they could.
Yeah. And so with climate, if you want to have a sort of permanent, evergreen solutions, there's some great ones like, your classic jasmines, your pandarias, what else evergreen? The potato vine is really light. It's very light, but it can really thicken up. And
I was about to say I don't like potato vine at all.
Now, what don't you like about it?
Well, the fact that it takes a lot of, it's one of those vines that you do have to stay on top of. Otherwise, you just get this really dead mass that keeps growing over itself, and only the outside is, and that applies to a lot of different climbers. But I just always see that potato vine in those unkept situations where there's just a great big bundle at the top and there's not much at the bottom anymore.
You haven't met my mother-in-law. She has a lot of time on her hands, and she would clip that with scissors every day.
Scissors.
It's magnificent.
Well, I'll come and have a look in your garden next time.
Thick. It's a fantastic cover on the back of the house, and it is well maintained, I have to say.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of vines and hedges, if you're not at them, they get woody and they don't look good.
That's right.
So, any foliage solution requires effort.
Yeah, that's right. And I guess the other thing I was just going to say about a climber is that it offers some opportunities. In addition to not taking up as much space, you can do some fantastic things with it. If you have some kind of fence that's really directly in your line of sight, you could create a fantastic focal point by making some designs with a climber. And you've seen those, and in fact you're doing one where, people will train their...
The Belgium fence,
yes,
they call
that's
it.
right,
Yes.
Exactly. I knew it would have it.
So
some
create a series of diamonds or some sort of pattern, and you train a climber onto that pattern.
Again, you've got to have patience.
Really high impact. Yes, you have to have patience. I mean, I planted it in January this year, and it has, in the last 6 months now, it has grown about 10 centimetres. It's got a long way to go.
So this is if you're into long-term solutions, that's one of them.
That's right. And so these are foliage solutions, can be longer-term solutions. You've got to be patient.
Yeah, that's right. And I was actually going to say, because I've used the little ficus pumila,
yes,
to great effect on a stone wall, which I just wanted to have some softening of, and it has grown beautifully. It's also one of those things, yes, you do need to stay on top of it, but it sticks to the wall itself. So if you're into low maintenance, you don't want to keep on binding something up, there's opportunity there too. And particularly if it's a backing or a fence that you don't really care about how it might get damaged, if you use something like a Boston ivy or one of those self sort of attaching climbers, that's a really good solution.
Yeah, and of course the Boston ivy being a deciduous, like the grapevine, so you need to just make sure you know what you're signing up to when if you use a vine.
Yes.
But just one more on foliage solutions, and that is the fastigiate trees or grafted trees. So they can be really great if you want to have a columnar kind of effect up against the fence where you're not hiding the fence, but you're actually creating foliage in front of the fence that's more interesting to look at, but isn't a maintenance issue. So
can you describe what you're actually thinking of? Because I'm struggling.
Yeah.
All I've got is one of those pencil pines or the cypress in my head when you describe that.
Yeah, right. So there's a whole bunch of different fastigiate trees, and they're often... they have
what does fastigiate mean?
Yes, I was going to say you often see it as the cultivar as fastigiata.
Oh, right.
And so if you see that word, what it means is
I feel like a complete twit for
columnar,
that.
the columnar form of a tree. So it's been... Some are naturally forming, but generally you can get acers, you get types of maples, you can get, types of oaks, actually. I saw a lovely pin oak the other day online, and you can get, the tulip tree actually has a fastigiate form, and the classic one is the pear tree, the ornamental pear, the Pyrrhus Calliarana capital that you see a lot in Canberra.
Around Canberra, yeah.
And they are basically columnar trees. They have a columnar growth habit, and they grow very narrow but very tall.
Yeah.
So when I'm saying very narrow, you can get ones that are sort of 1 metre wide, diameter, to about a couple of metres, and then up to about 6 to 8 metres tall.
Fantastic. So that's a great option if you don't want to sort of have a classically trained hedge. And it's something that can also extend above your fence line,
yes.
creating some height and interest in that way too.
Yeah, and that's often a really nice effect as well. You could strip off some of the lower branches and you have just the stem that goes up to the top of the fence, and then all the foliage comes at top, and then you can have lower layered planting. So you've got this sense of layered planting effect, and it isn't just a hedge. It's much more interesting, and it gives you that depth because your eye doesn't stop at the foliage. It knows that it can keep going towards the fence. So it just makes your yard feel bigger.
Fantastic. And I guess sort of the same concepts really would apply to screening other things in your garden. I'm thinking about the other problem structures. We've all got that shed that doesn't look particularly attractive, or maybe you've got a chicken coop which is very utilitarian, or maybe you've got an air conditioner that's been stuck in a place that's really prominently visible as well. We've all seen places like this because builders are not necessarily thinking about what you're actually doing in your backyard when they're designing where your air conditioner goes. So all of those things, really the same principles apply to what you can put in front of them.
Yes, that's right. I mean, air conditioners are a bit tricky because you've got to make sure you have no foliage in their sort of outlet flow. It'll just kill everything. And, it needs
like
to have...
bird strike with a jet plane.
That's all right. It won't be very happy if you've tried to stick something, and it's not good for the air conditioning unit. And also you need to make sure you've got some maintenance. Access.
Yeah, very important.
Yeah, that's right. But, if you've got an air conditioning unit, the idea of just sticking some kind of screening fence in front of it just means you've got a fence then that you need to screen.
That's very true.
So you've got to look at these things and say, well, what is it I'm trying to hide here? Is it all just about hiding? So I'm going to put this out there because this used to be, so we always think about we have to conceal, but there's a lot of different ways to trick the eye into managing an eyesore in your garden.
So give me an example.
Okay. Right. And this comes back to my early days of managing, of battle planning for the enemy.
We're going back into army military analogies here.
We are because, the idea wasn't just about sort of, hit and fight. You wanted to distort and disguise and disrupt and conceal. And so there were all these sort of words that you went, wow, there's different engineering effects we can use here that aren't just about destroy.
So this is the benefit of having a second career garden designer. Yes. They can take their military experience and apply it to your backyard.
So when I'm garden designing, I'm not just garden designing, I'm battle planning.
She's thinking about how that ivy is going to strangle her in the future, and she's going to make sure it is not.
Yeah, so
I feel like we should have a movie here.
So therefore, to bring this out, because we've talked a lot about conceal. So now I want to talk about distract. So the idea of distract is to make your eye not see what that obvious thing is. So
would you do that by directing it somewhere else? Or would you do it by
directing your eye somewhere else?
Yeah, that's right.
Yes.
No, the ivy.
Well, I was kind of wondering.
So that you might actually create a focal point elsewhere to take you away from what you're looking at that might otherwise annoy you. Or, so we talked about conceal. That's where you just cover it up. This is actually saying, I'm going to create something somewhere. It's a diversion.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, diversion. See, that's another great military term. Right. Okay. So let's talk about the distract. So sometimes what you can do is you actually bring foliage forward in the garden. So there's this tendency for people to want to put foliage on the outskirts around the boundary fence.
That's so you can have a cricket pitch in the middle.
That's it.
Or the hills hoist.
Room for your hills hoist. Hills hoist. Now, what a wonderful feature of every modern Australian garden. Every
older, that's right, Australian garden.
But you'd be surprised how many people want to hang on to their hills hoist because they're really, really functional.
They are really functional, but God, they're ugly.
And I do have to convince people that it's great to still have your hills hoist, but let's put it in a utility space of its own.
Well, can I just point out that my neighbours are very lovely and they have built this nice little utility space for their hills hoist, which I can see from my house.
How kind of them.
I know. So I am in the current process of trying to conceal that with some camellias.
Oh, yes.
Because there's no way to divert or distract around that area.
Now, it just occurred to me that if anyone's listening who's not from Australia, because it is an Australian icon,
True.
the Hills Hoist is a rotary rotating clothesline.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's right. And
Yes.
it is the thing that we actually featured in the Olympics that went straight over the heads of the rest of the world because they had no idea what we were on about, along with our Victor lawnmowers.
That's right. That's right. It's Australian icon.
It is.
Okay, so let me get back onto, so distracting. Another thing, so we talked about distracting as in bring foliage forward. So make yourself see things that you want to see, like...
So how do you do that? How do you bring foliage forward?
Yeah, right. So a lot
I've
of people...
got this vision of cutting off branches and sticking them around the garden.
Yeah. Well, no, actually, that's not what I was thinking. But what it is you actually plant a tree right close to your deck.
Yep.
So you bring trees and features and garden beds up to your deck so that you've got to step through a little transition space to then go to your lawn, to then close off again. And so you're making these garden rooms. So by doing that, you're actually denying the eye going straight to a fence in a long view.
Which goes back to this, it also creates that sense of there's something else out there, something to draw you into the garden, that interest that might be behind something. And you might have a little, sneak peek of it from particular angles, but you won't see it straight out right.
Yeah, yeah. And another great thing...
And it won't be near where the air conditioner is.
That's And another fabulous thing is put vertical interest in your garden. So structures, we're talking.
Yeah.
So say, for example, an arbour, a walk-through arbour that is actually parallel to a fence line. So the arbour might have a beautiful Pierre de Ronsard rose, climbing rose going over it,
I was wondering where
wisteria,
going with the Pierre de
or
Ronsard.
a beautiful ornamental grapevine. And so what you're seeing is the arbour
From the side.
From the side,
Yeah.
and you're not seeing the fence. And so the arbour itself is quite an attraction. You can have a seat under there, which is sort of walk through. I've got a seat if I want to stop and perch, continue walking. But you know what? The eye is no longer seeing that fence.
Absolutely.
So
That
these are
sounds
little
like a great
tricks,
idea.
tricks of the trade.
Because the other thing I was thinking about is you can also use those sort of, like a sculpture that might be a bit of a screening sculpture of some sort somewhere. And I was thinking like parallel lines that might be sort of, facing a particular way that might direct you away or point you in a particular direction as well, rather than a really static sculpture. But I think we need to keep going because I think there are some really important ones here, particularly things like sometimes those structural things that we thought were going to be amazing, like the outdoor kitchen, never really worked. What do we do there?
Yeah. I always say to clients, really think about what you're going to use in your garden, how you're going to use it. And I went to a classic one, which was a beautiful new build, and it had all been very landscaped, and they lived in the place for about a year and a half, and the lady said to me, look, we just don't use half of this because we can't be bothered taking the food all the way to the pool house where the outdoor kitchen is.
That is exactly what I think every time I see them. I think it's bad enough in the kitchen having to move things from, the table to the dishwasher, let alone running in and out of the house.
Yes, and yourself, it's someone forgets something, it's like back to the house, back and forth, and then you've just got trays and trays of stuff that have to go back to the kitchen, and unless you've got a bunch of servants to do that for you, then you know who's doing it.
That's exactly right.
It's you.
or the very unhappy people that get roped into helping you.
Yes, it's not fun.
Usually the children.
So, it's really about, right up front, think about that. Try and detach yourself from the romantic idea of entertaining in the garden. If you're just not that sort of person.
Or build something that is directly attached to the house where it's not going to be such an issue anymore rather than something out there. But look, say we've gone ahead, we've had the brilliant idea when in our, early gardening career that we wanted the outdoor kitchen. We've got it there now. And 30 years later, it's looking pretty tired. And every time you look at it, you think, that's $50,000 I could have put into something else. So what are we going to do about it?
Yeah, well, you can build a granny flat around it.
That sounds like a great solution.
Yeah, and then it's actually useful. And a lot of the time where these outdoor facilities aren't used is because they're not covered.
Yeah.
And so, when the weather's slightly off or it's a bit dewy or it's a bit cold or whatever, you're just not out there. Or there's not a good enough lighting. So maybe the solution is it needs to have more lighting. Maybe the solution is you need to have an undercover walkway to get to that kitchen.
Yeah.
So rather than sort of demolish it, relocate it, and which is a big effort, you actually need to make it more accessible. And that might be the introduction of lighting, heating, covered walkways, better furniture, somewhere that actually attracts you and draws you. Yeah, walls. Perhaps that area has a lot of wind exposure and that sort of thing, or sun. That it just needs to be shaded in a way. So you can look at, well, what is it that's going to make that space more usable? What will take you out there?
Because I was also thinking part of that is also go with it, like we talked about in the last episode. Go with what you've already got there.
Yeah.
But maybe its purpose is different now. Maybe it becomes the outdoor studio, or it becomes the, breakout area for the kids that have now grown up. So think about how you might use that space differently and shaping that space so that it can be used for that purpose rather than the one that it was originally intended for.
That's a great point, Sarge. Actually, I don't seem to emphasise your great points that often, but that one is
My legs are okay too.
Yeah. Good legs. But that's a really great point, and I often say to clients, let's have this space in your garden as a multifunctional space that morphs over time, and that right now it's great for the kids' trampoline, but that's not always going to be there. And then it becomes a fire pit, and that's great when the kids are teenagers. And then it becomes a place for the glass house, and that's great when you've got time to propagate. Or and it just has this evolution as your life changes, and you're not having to reinvent or re-landscape your whole garden, but you just get to reinvent that little space.
Well, I think that's a great point because really, the thing that I think is often missed is that gardens don't stay static, and when you have a garden designed, it's only a moment in time that you're really designing for. It will change over time. As your trees grow, you'll get more shade. Things will change around your garden that you haven't necessarily anticipated. And that goes also for the way you're going to use it throughout your life. So think about those different things right up front and make sure that you're building something that's got some longevity. Yeah. I just think before we wrap up, there's one I just really want to touch on, because it's not always the thing that is in your face that you want to design out. It's also things like loud noises, highways, chicken coops with loud crowing roosters, although I think basically the oven is the best place and solution for that. And stinky compost heaps or other things like that you might be wanting to deal with. Got some solutions for those?
Yeah, I always try and group anything that's utility or productive into zones, and those zones don't need to be close to your living, entertaining spaces.
No. But I love having that stinky compost bin right near the kitchen.
And so you still got to have it accessible. If it's not accessible, you're not using it. But it's got to be in a space where maybe it's accessible outside your laundry door, but not outside your kitchen space.
Yeah,
because your kitchen
it's a fine balance.
It's a fine balance, and you've got to really get to think about. It's just like when you're designing anything, you think about what's the effect that I'm trying to achieve here. How will that be useful?
And that goes for when you're designing your garden, you've got to be thinking about what else is happening around your garden that you might also want to be screening out. And that goes for even the environmental things, like do you have a prevailing wind that comes from a particular direction? So you might want to put some trees in to create a windbreak so that doesn't, but that might also deal with the smell that comes across the neighbour's fence, because their compost is right next to the fence in an area that might actually be affecting your garden.
Yeah, that's right. And that's where structures, siting of, like I had a bit of a hole in the sort of front area of my garden, and was a great place for the yurt, because it just gave me
the kids. We put the kids in a hole and filled it with sand.
But that and just things like that was a great place to site it, because it just instantly solved a privacy problem as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So really thinking about the dual purpose of things and thinking beyond your immediate garden and what might be impacting you in the future as well. And all of the things we talked about, the diversion, the distraction, screening, privacy, how you might use those kind of, elements to deal with those problems both inside and outside your garden.
Yeah. And when in doubt, like tonight, we're just going to go and sit on this massive big lawn area in an igloo. You can always add an igloo in a winter garden, a pop-up igloo, and then have someone come and bring you lots of beautiful drippy cheese.
That sounds like a great idea. I think the thing that's missing is someone to bring lots of cheese. The igloo's the easy bit.
That's right.
I know, we've got to come up with some solution for that one. But I think in the meantime, we probably should be talking about our next fortnight's theme, which is designing a cottage-style garden. We thought we'd get right into some of the more classic topics for garden design. And really, cottage-style gardens they're timeless. They've been around forever. So what are we going to be touching on in that one?
Well, we're going to look at what's a typical kind of layout, what's the composition of those parts, so the type of materials to use, structures, and the flow that you would get in a cottage garden.
And how to put them all together.
How to put it all together, that's the key. That's the design message.
It is, absolutely. Well, we'll talk to you in a couple of weeks. And until then, have a great fortnight. See you later. Bye.
Bye.